Hello everyone and welcome back to Get to the Point Tech. It's been a while since my last video. Life happens. However, we're back and we've got a couple of videos lined up that I hope you're going to be excited for. So to make sure you don't miss out on anything, subscribe if you haven't already. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Soundcore Sport X20 by Anker. I'm normally a pretty big Anker fan for things like battery packs, charging cables, things like that, but I've never really taken the time to take a look at their Soundcore line of earbuds or headphones. These ones were actually loaned to me by a friend, and so we're going to give them a quick little review and let you know how they compare to things like the Airpods Pro 2s that I actually use as my daily driver. They're not exactly in the same price range, but someone who's looking into earbuds would probably want to know what they're missing out on or what they're getting for their money. Let's start off with a quick tour around the box. We can see that these earbuds have adaptive ANC, something that they call bass up, which we'll get to in a bit, IP68 water resistance, and a pretty impressive 12-hour playtime with 48-hour from the case. These also feature these ear hooks, which I'm not traditionally a big fan of, but these are actually quite adaptable. They extend in and out, and they also rotate completely around. They're quite flexible. They're not as rigid as some of the other earbuds I've tried in the past. One notable spec is that they have a fast charge of 5 minutes for 2 hours. Pretty good. So getting straight into it, the presentation itself is pretty standard stuff, although it's actually relatively difficult to get this out of the box. I had to refilm this section because I just full-on dropped this as I was holding it. It is a pretty slick, smooth, pebble-like shape. We'll come back to comparing this to the AirPods Pro case in just a moment. For now, we'll put this aside. Inside the box, we have a manual, and we have ear tips, and a USB-C charging cable. So quickly take a look at those. You can see here they go from extra small, small, medium is already on the device itself, large and extra large. Pretty good selection here. They're really soft and flimsy, but haven't had any issues with that so far. We'll put that back in here. And in here we do have the USB-C cable, but it's not USB-C to USB-C. It is USB-A to USB-C. However, it does have the Soundcore logo on it, so it's a nice touch. So inside the case itself, it actually opens up by pressing this button down here, which seems to be magnetic, and I believe it is just releasing the magnetic latch. When closing, there's nothing that clips on, it just securely stays shut, which is pretty cool. This LED in the front kind of lets you know what the charging status of the device is. And inside you can see that they have the left and right earbud. Taking it out is pretty easy. The ridges around the edge here are really easy to grab. And ultimately here you can see just how flexible the ear hooks are. They do rotate quite a bit, not 360, but a pretty good amount. And they do extend in and out just a little bit, but it might be enough to make someone's experience go from uncomfortable to comfortable. As I mentioned before, these are preloaded with the medium-sized ear tips rather. There is one button on each earbud. This pretty much handles all of the interaction you need to do with the device. In terms of fit, I never really had any issues with them falling out of my ears. I don't have a history of issues with earbuds falling out of my ears, so this was par for the course. The hooks don't do too much for me. Actually, they get in the way of my glasses. They're quite thick. They are very soft though, so ultimately it's probably a non-issue, and I'd say what you are going to get from having the hook on is that extra assurance that if you're working out and you're running around or jumping during a workout, these are going to stay on your ears even if the ear tips slide out for any reason. Getting into a bit of the user experience, In order to switch from noise cancellation mode to transparency, you have to hold down this button. It doesn't matter on which earbud, you press this down. And unfortunately, the sound it makes when switching between modes is quite jarring. It makes a doorbell sound for entering transparency mode and some sort of bassy musical chime for noise cancellation. If I'm able to record this from the earpiece, I will put that sound in now. Ultimately, the sounds don't represent anything meaningful and they're quite loud. Like, I don't think it really matters how loud the music is you're listening to, or even if you're listening to anything at all. Holding this button down will make it switch modes and it will play that noise pretty loudly in your ears. It's not great. The pairing experience is actually pretty intuitive. You pretty much just take them out of the case and then you put them back in and then they enter pairing mode. I don't think it's doing it now, probably because it is connected to my phone. It's possible that it only really enters that mode if it doesn't have a connection. But it was pretty easy to get these hooked up to my phone when I initially set them up. Changing earpieces is actually quite easy. You pretty much just take them off this way and they don't snap on quite like the AirPod Pros do, but they do have a little satisfying click. And I've never had issues of them coming off of my ear or staying in my ear while the rest of the piece is being pulled out. So they're pretty solid. I'd say that no complaints there. Comparing the case to the AirPods Pro 2 case, you can see there is a size difference in terms of almost every dimension. It's thicker, it's taller, it's kind of just bigger in every way. However, it is a lot lighter in the hand. This has some heft and this is almost like a toy in comparison. You may or may not like that. I like that the AirPod Pro case does fit into my jeans pocket really easily. It slides in and out. This would probably be really easy to enter just a normal pocket, but maybe not that smaller one that I tend to put this into. There is a USB-C charging port on the back, but there's no chime making or wireless charging. You are getting what you pay for in this case. The battery life is rated at 12 hours with ANC off or 7 hours with ANC on. And for the case, it's 48 hours versus 28 hours. I'd say you're going to want ANC on, and we'll find out why shortly when I talk about sound quality. But otherwise, not bad. All right, let's get to the good stuff. So, transparency mode. This is a pretty common way to wear the earbuds, especially if you're commuting or walking around outside. It has a reasonably good reproduction of sound. Objectively, when I'm just listening to them with nothing going on in the background and just asking someone to speak or listening to music off of my laptop speakers, it reproduces the sound fairly well. The problem is it has a background hissing sound that just ruins the entire thing. It is not subtle. The moment that I switch into transparency mode, just the atmosphere is filled with a hiss that does not stop. It's really unfortunate because it was otherwise reproducing the external sounds very well. One of the other tests I do when I'm testing transparency modes on earbuds is talking out loud and seeing how much I can hear myself talk. Hearing yourself talking out loud is ultimately not as natural as on the AirPods Pro 2, but factoring in this price point, I'd say it's more acceptable than not. The AirPods have this way of making it seem like you're not even wearing the AirPods, whereas this one makes you really know that, it's almost like having your ears plugged and talking to yourself. That's the kind of vibe you get. But it's not the worst interpretation of transparency I've ever heard. Noise cancellation, on the other hand, is quite good. It mostly eliminates low frequency sounds and mildly suppresses high frequency sounds, but I think, to be fair, even the AirPod Pro 2 don't do an incredible job with the higher frequency sounds either. Back-to-back comparisons with the AirPods Pro 2 felt surprisingly similar, but ultimately the AirPods do have an edge here. I'd say I was pleasantly surprised given the price point on how well this does with noise cancellation, but ultimately don't expect miracles. One additional note here is that when you're in noise cancellation mode, when you take one earbud out of your ear, it does not automatically switch the other one that remains in your ear to transparency mode. The AirPods do this, and I think it's a really nice feature because when you still have one ear in noise cancellation mode, it can sometimes upset the balance in your ear. I don't know if I'm the only one who experiences that, but I suspect Apple does that with the AirPods for a reason. All right, the meat and potatoes, sound quality. I listened to quite a few tracks with these earbuds, and I went back and forth with the AirPods Pro 2s just to see how they would compare to each other. Again, I know it's not a purely fair comparison, but I needed a reference point because I do use the AirPods quite a bit. Getting straight to the point, there's less clarity in the mids and highs on these earbuds. The bass is deeper, but it's a bit muddier. One of the ways I think I could explain what I'm experiencing is by saying, like, when I switched back to the AirPods Pro 2 mid-song, it felt like I was getting some water out of my ears in a way. I know that sounds bad, but truth be told, in isolation and without switching back and forth, the sound quality is pretty solid. I was able to get into the groove, I just forgot myself for a bit and was listening to a few songs back to back. But ultimately, there is something missing from these that the AirPods Pro 2s have. But one thing I want to stress is if you end up with these earbuds and you want to listen to music for its sound quality, you have to be in noise cancellation mode. The background hiss from the transparency mode is so distracting in music, it's unbearable. When you're listening to any softer or quieter song, or if you're just in between songs, or there's a lull in the music, that hiss just comes straight out. There's no mistaking it. But, when you're doing a workout and you're just listening to pump up beats, this is much less of a concern. You probably wouldn't even notice. One of the last major pieces that I like to test when I'm dealing with earbuds is the microphone. And as I kind of expected, they're not very impressive. They're typical Bluetooth microphone quality. It's quite tinny. It sounds like you're talking into a tin can. The recording coming out of it is quite quiet, and there's a bit of background noise, so the quality is more miss than hit. This is an audio test of the Soundcore Sport X20 by Anchor. This is an audio test of the AirPods Pro 2 by Apple. One additional note about the Soundcore earbuds is that they don't have any proximity sensors. So if you're listening to music and someone comes up to you and wants to speak to you, if you take your earbud off of one ear, the music continues playing in the other ear. It doesn't automatically pause. This may or may not matter to you, but it's worth noting that that's one of the more premium features you get from something like an AirPod. So overall, what do I think about these? For the price, I think they're pretty good. For $100 Canadian or $80 US, and actually they're on sale for $56 US right now, you're getting a pretty good bang for the buck. The Bluetooth pairing doesn't involve some sort of complicated Konami code. The connection is solid. I never had any connection issues. The sound quality is good enough, with the caveat that the microphone isn't very impressive. It's about standard for a typical Bluetooth mic. I wouldn't rely on these too heavily for taking calls for work, but for what it is, these are a budget-friendlier option than the competition. Admittedly, comparing these two sets of earbuds is not a strictly speaking fair comparison, but if someone is shopping around for earbuds, I believe they'd want to know what they're getting for the extra money out of the AirPod Pros. You're getting better sound quality, more clarity in those mids and highs, solid noise canceling performance, superior transparency mode, much better microphones, and ultimately the Apple ecosystem perks of not even having to think about pairing. You just kind of open them up and they're just connecting to your phone automatically, and so on and so on and so on. But you cannot deny the fact that for this price point, these are actually surprisingly good. If you don't want to spend more than $100 on a pair of earbuds, you certainly could do worse than these earbuds here. If you only had to pick one and you really were on a budget, I'd take a look into these, especially when they're on sale. They're actually pretty solid. I think you'd be happy. I've tested some earbuds in the past that I was very disappointed with, and they cost 2 times more than these. If you already have a premium set of earbuds, whether they're AirPods or otherwise, you could also consider these as a backup pair for workout purposes. They have the ear hooks, they'll stay on your head, you don't have to worry about them falling off. They have reasonably good water resistance and sweat resistance, so that's a consideration as well. But I know some of you will kind of balk at the idea of spending, a bunch of money on AirPods and then also buying a secondary pair of earbuds like this. For me personally, I'm sticking with the AirPods Pro 2s. By the way, for those of you keeping track at home, I am recording this entire video using the DJI Mic Mini as promised. I encourage you to let me know in the comments what you think of the audio quality compared to the Blue Yeti mic that I was using previously. I am still going to be making a full review of this. I just need to record a couple of videos with them before I can form an opinion. If you found this review to be useful, please like it. And if you don't want to miss out on my future videos that are coming pretty soon, please subscribe. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.